Okay. Welcome all to the Cascade Hermitage Sunday morning potluck talk gathering. So it's good to have everyone here. To introduce myself, I'm Nisabho. I ordained in the Thai forest tradition about 8 years ago, and my parents just moved to the area to start a small hermitage, which will invite monks and nuns to the area, and I'll be here for the next month and visiting at the end of every month after that. But the idea is to have sort of a community that can gather every Sunday morning and share Dhamma teachings, a place to sit and a talk and some food too. So I'll be live streaming this talk. So if you have any questions at the end that you wouldn't like on a live stream, then maybe just hold them and we'll turn it off and talk afterwards. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, I thought today would be a good day to talk about chaos and order as a topic. Mara, who's here, was talking about a word she learned that was coined by the founder of Visa, the credit card company, called chaotic, which I think implies or speaks to the movement of a system between chaos and order. And I think a good question in practice is how we find that optimal place between revivifying chaos and sterile order, and how we exist on that edge where there's freshness and newness in life, and where we have the agility and the creativity to move within our lives in a way that is playful and joyful, but also keep our center and hold our true course through that path. And what I thought would be a helpful Buddhist framework to approach this from, well, there's a few terms and lists which are helpful. And one of them is the term sankhara, which in Buddhist thought is translated frequently as formation. And a way we can look at it commonly is the personality formations or habit patterns which we create and live by and live with every day. And a nice translation I've heard for sankhara in English is program. So this is the way you act on autopilot the moment you walk into a party, and how you say immediately have that drive to be, let's say, the center of attention, and to interact with people in a certain way and present a certain image, and it's all automatic. Similarly, it might be walking into the party and feeling shy and wanting to sort of disappear and just feeling deeply unpleasant or dissatisfied with the situation. It can be the tendency right when you wake up to walk to the fridge and get cheesecake, or to sit down and instead practice for a time meditation. And a large part of the practice is to replace unwholesome sankharas with good, wholesome programs. There's another connotation of the term which I appreciate, which is the habit of perception, and how over time, over years, we learn to perceive things mainly by the concepts we associate with them and to overlook them. And at a certain point in life, the freshness which we may have experienced as children frequently is almost completely gone. And what we're left with is just programs, and programs of seeing people a certain way. I think we can all relate to this in terms of someone we've just met. There's a newness and novelty to our interactions with them. But after 10 years of living, say, dating someone or something in a relationship, say, that's not that healthy, the other person becomes almost a cardboard cutout of themselves. And I think a relationship to the world manifests this way as well. And I think what this can be seen as in part is a loss of that revivifying chaos, so to speak, and a complete residing in things become sterile and ordered in the sense of these concepts we overlay onto people become, and to the world, become all they are. And they're manageable and simple and comprehensible and utterly dead. And I think this is the essence of the fall from grace as well. That is such a perennial image in terms of after childhood, this steady loss of that freshness and immediacy of life until by the time we're 30, it can just feel like we're numb to that beauty which was once so available. I think this can be looked at in part as a problem with the fact that we only have the ability to take in so much novelty at one time. And so we tend to try to hold things around us in a certain configuration, whether it's how we perceive them or how we try to control the relationships around us. And this is an interesting entry point into where the Buddhist path addresses this question of how we organize our lives such that the things that are ordered, and the things that are allowed to be new and fresh in themselves are allowed to be just that. And I think this could be essentially, or in some ways, looked at as the movement from looking at the world and others as its to looking at them as thou. So the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path of practice is frequently divided into three sections: Sila, which is morality, Samadhi, which is formal meditation or concentration, and then wisdom, which is Panya. And Sila, or morality, is how we interact with the world around us. And in the most basic terms, it's the holding of the 5 moral precepts that the Buddha said were the foundation of a human life. So not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, and not taking intoxicants that dull the mind. And this concept of sila, of morality, extends to the other levels of precepts that the Buddha spoke of, whether it's the 10, which would include not eating after noon, not handling money, which are what novices take on, or the 227, which a monk takes on, plus thousands of others, to be honest, that aren't in the explicit monastic code. And because of the echoes of Puritanism in our culture, this encouragement towards restraint and a moral code can be looked at as deadening and restrictive. But what I believe really happens when one takes such precepts on is one finds immense freedom hidden there. And I believe this is because when we lack a guide in terms of our actions, then there's too much novelty and too much chaos to take in and to navigate. And because we can't accommodate all that, what we do is we rely on sankhara, specifically the sankharas of our personality, of our usual way of interacting with people, of the habit patterns we formed over years. And this is the interesting thing for me around meeting monks and other practitioners who'd really developed their hearts, is they seem to be so agile in their movement from personality to personality. None of them were fake, but they could embody different attitudes completely dependent on what was useful at the time. So there are stories of Ajahn Chah, the sort of father of the lineage I'm part of, turning his attention to some monk who'd slipped up and just admonishing him really wrathfully because the monk had really messed up. And there was a Western monk massaging him at the time, and who noted that Ajahn Chah's muscles didn't get tense at all while he was sort of admonishing this monk. And then the next second, Ajahn Chah was known for he'd turn to a group of lay people who'd come and visit him 5 minutes later and be completely all smiles and ebullient. And I think that the reason that such masters are able to move with such agility between different sankhara or program structures or personality structures, depending on what's helpful, is because they have a basis in something much deeper and an external structure which holds them. Of course, if they've attained to awakening, I think that they have moved to something that's utterly stable and beyond all structures. But even those I know who've practiced for a long time, maybe without attaining awakening, still have this same ability. And I know in the people I've met who have practiced for a long time, one of the most heartening things has been to see how they're able more and more to hold all these personality habits so much more lightly. I've been living with my parents for the past few weeks, and there's a good saying that if you think you're enlightened, you should go live with your family. And that hasn't been actually that bad of a test because my parents are lovely people and we get along very well. But one of the very heartening things or interesting parts about having lived in Thailand and returned every few years and seen them has been seeing their growth in the Dhamma more and more because they're practitioners. And what I've noticed really concretely is in the moments where I've slipped up and said something that was cruel or belittling or hurtful, has been that 8 years ago, I know how that conversation would have went, and it was not beautiful. And I think I would have gotten chewed out pretty badly. Or they would have just retreated into themselves and curled up, metaphorically speaking, or literally, depending. But over the years, what I found, and recently in this last visit, is that when I do slip, instead of that hurt or self-righteous self coming up in the person who I've slipped up with, it comes up briefly. And there's a famous story of an Aikido master who, a student came up to him and said, you know, I noticed that you never lose your balance. And he said, I do lose my balance, I just recover it so quickly you don't notice. And what I've noticed more and more is that even though that same self-righteous or hurt structure comes up with, say, my parents in this instance, that it's held so much more lightly, and there's this ability to move past it and see through it and come to a place of understanding. And all this is to say that when we take on these structures, say of the precepts of how we interact in the world, then the usual personality structures and ego structures, which are so often the ones we naturally rely on, we don't need to rely on them so much anymore because there's something much deeper. And I think this is the great conceit of our conception of freedom, that it's something you can just move steadily towards being more free in terms of all your action. But my experience is that we need that security and that lack of freedom in certain areas of our lives, and that's what lets freedom in other areas of our lives blossom. And also that whether we know it or not, we are structuring our lives in this way. So the images that we use in the Buddhist path or any spiritual path can seem archaic, to have an altar or a shrine you bow to. And yet I think what that misses is the fact that we already have our altars and shrines. I've mentioned this before, that on what people keep on the top shelf, the highest point of their house usually is the liquor. Or what looks most like a shrine in a house will be the big screen TV. And we spend many, many hours a day facing it. So we already have the things we orient ourselves towards and around, and how we structure our environments to provide that sense of order and being held. So a large part of the spiritual path is just being very conscious to acknowledge that, and then to steadily replace those structures with new, wholesome ones. So you elevate what deserves to be elevated. What happens if you take one room in your house and dedicate it to prayer or meditation? What happens if you just take the TV and put it off to the side a little, and instead put on that shelf something beautiful that symbolizes the spiritual, flowers or a Buddha image or an image of Christ if you're Christian? What happens if every morning, as soon as you wake up, you consciously bow to something and spread loving kindness to those you love? So morality for me means not just the precepts and that moral conduct, but also all the props. How do you surround your life with the correct reminders of what is most important? And the props do matter. And the second aspect of the path which the Buddha spoke to is Samadhi, or meditation, or formal practice. And in its one good translation of Samadhi is unification of mind. And it's that solidity of the heart, or the unification of mind and firmness of heart's foundation, that comes after one has developed formal practice, where the mind is able to stay still, and all the passing and changing moods, all the chaos internally, is allowed to move past one, but not be grabbed onto or lost or believed in. And a teacher I really respect said that the Buddha said that all things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. Namely, to say that we're surrounded by a vortex of change. And that what you do when you meditate is you try to challenge the Buddha, to prove him wrong on every one of those points. So you bring your mind to unification and try to learn to control and brighten your mind states. So the Buddha says that all things are impermanent. So you try to make a mind state of brightness as permanent and lasting and stable as you can. And the Buddha says that all things are unsatisfactory. So you try to brighten the mind so that it's as satisfying and robust and nutritive a state as you possibly can cultivate. And the Buddha says that all things are not self, namely beyond control. And so you try to become as skilled as you can at directing the mind into all the venues it should be directed into. And only when you've pushed the mind to that limit through the practice of samadhi and learning to be very skilled with the mind, can you corner yourself enough that a complete break with those usual conditions is possible and complete awakening can open. But until then, what you're trying to do is create the most amount of order within your house, so to speak. Formal meditation practice or samadhi is putting your house internally in perfect order and making it a bright, beautiful place, empty of everything that's not necessary. And I've met people who've developed samadhi at this level, and they are luminous. And there's this ability of them, it seems, to walk through the world untouched, and to navigate with this agility that I've been speaking to. Because when there's this deep sense of robust nourishment from the practice of samadhi, then they don't need to rely on trying to alter external conditions constantly and control those around them to make them satisfy their own need for happiness. The happiness is already there, it's internal. I've heard a metaphor of it's similar to someone who wins the lottery but still chooses to work at their job. They're not worried about the job or stressed about it anymore, but they choose to do it just because it's a good thing to do. And similarly, if someone has cultivated this inner wealth, they interact with people, they carry on relationships, but there's not that same feeding off of the relationships. And so they can approach them with complete skill and care. And the final aspect of the path is wisdom or panya. And I think this can be looked at as the seeing the impermanence or the changeability of everything around us, and seeing that we do exist in this vortex of change, and seeing that clearly. And that when one sees that, then one releases little by little their tight-knuckled grip on everything around them. And like Ajahn Chah says, you still can hold things and pick them up, but you hold them lightly and you can put them down when you need to. But the only way I think that one gets to that point where they can see clearly the shifting nature of conditions is when they've cultivated these first two notions of order in their lives, both how we structure our external world, because sila is our interaction, morality is how we interact with the external world. So when your morality is truly pure, when you've structured your environment to reflect your deepest values and to cultivate them, and you've put up that shrine, or you've dedicated a room in the house towards things you love and are worthy of love, when you've structured your day so that you have those 20 minutes in the morning to sit, or 45 in the morning to sit, and 45 in the evening, then this leads to the internal structuring of samadhi practice, where suddenly there's a firmness of heart, an ability to direct and cultivate bright mind states, a profound sense of self-worth and purpose. And only when those two things are strong is the heart willing to look clearly at the rather difficult situation we find ourselves in, which is existing in a world that we cannot control and that will slip like water between our fingers. And how do you exist in that world and love it and serve it, but not be broken by it? And the thing is, if you've cultivated this internal order of the first two factors, then you can look. The heart has something in it which can eventually see clearly that nature of the external world. And move through it with grace and agility and skill. And the strange thing about all this is, I think, for me personally, that when one begins to move in that way, there's a sense of a much deeper resonance which one steps into. And I know Buddhadasa spoke of this as the Dhamma, walking in line with the Dhamma. And he said that for those of you who are Christian, you can translate this as God's will. And those concepts have, the concept of God's will is a bit problematic in a religion without a, overarching deity. But I think the idea of a great song or a harmony is appropriate in terms of, even in a Buddhist context, in terms of each of the factors of the Eightfold Path. The English word right view, right intention, it's a translation of the Pali word sama, which means harmonious. And there's something in me personally, at least, that finds that when I'm at my calmest and my best, that I can usually feel that harmony in terms of what's a harmonious action and what is out of harmony, what is out of tune. And this phrase appears in the suttas as well. One learns to dwell in tune. So maybe the interplay between chaos and order in our lives can just be thought of as that, as not just we're learning to create as much order internally and in our lives that's completely under our own control, that we can allow that chaos and beauty and changeability that is inherent in the world to manifest fully and to interact with it without fear and without depending on it. And also that when we do that, then we can allow those around us to be truly as they are and not try to control them with a white-knuckled grip. And we can love them in that way rather than in a way that tries and seeks to make them into what we want them or need them to be. And perhaps that's the appropriate relationship of chaos and order, is one in which we've created this internal order so that we can manifest with agility and creativity externally as well, even as we try to change conditions for the better. And maybe also it can be conceived of as music, in that we establish a scale and a octave or a key that we play in, and we can move around within that, yet there can be a structure and harmony also, even within that diversity of action. And I think that's a good question, is how do we structure our lives? And where do we find where can we create beautiful order? And where can we find chaos and creativity that revives us, and freshness once again? And I think the problem is when those two get all muddled together and we're trying to control things that we can't control, and we're letting run wild the internal elements that we should not let run wild. Yeah, and I think that's enough for today. So that was kind of me talking to myself as well. I have never tried to speak on this at all. So yeah, I was curious if we could do brief breakout groups and maybe does anyone have people want to speak about anything specific, or have any questions around the topic or anything in general? It's fine too.
It struck home that freedom, restricting some allows other freedoms to blossom.
Yeah.
That's kind of the juxtaposed upon itself.
It's the irony of, people see all the forms of, say, the monastics and like the rules, the costumes, but when you see someone like Ajahn Chah or these great masters, there's such freedom within that. And I found it's been a huge load off my mind to just, you know, the ways you have of interacting, and there's less, for example, our hierarchy in the Sangha is very strict, completely dependent on seniority. And yet it's such a relief to not have to constantly be negotiating with like, how much do I respect this monk? How attained is he? Like, I've met some really annoying monks who are quite senior, and I've had to serve them and upatak them, which is our, word for like being their assistant. And yet, because it's just you, if someone's senior to you, you bow to them, and there's such freedom in that, and such powerful training too, because serving the monks who are the most difficult, it's sometimes the best training of all. And I also think it's the conceit of, it also relates to something that people say about meditation practices. Everyone will say, don't become addicted to jhana, to deep concentration. But I think what that doesn't acknowledge is we're already addicted to sense pleasures. So all we have to acknowledge our current addiction, and then you just replace it with much more wholesome, less fragile sources of well-being, which is the Samadhi practice, or good friendship, purpose. And similarly, we already have innumerable structures around our lives, but most of them we don't notice, or we've just created without taking stock of the true implications of that. So the personality structures, the way we have of interacting, the way we structure our days. And I think, this is just acknowledging that and then transferring that order to something much more intentional and beautiful. Like the big screen TV, it looks a lot like an altar, and we watch rituals on it. Like, what is a football game, We have our rituals, we have our things we worship, and I think acknowledging that first makes all this seem a lot less arcane, It's a lot less silly than the rituals we usually look at. I mean, a bunch of guys kicking around a ball, it's sort of like, okay, Or you could bow to this, or to whatever image is representative of the highest spiritual ideal, whether that's, Christ or some image of the Quran, whatever it is. Any other topics people would like to talk about?
So forgive me, this might be a really obvious.
No, please.
Is Buddha God to you? Is God different? Do you believe in God? Or is it more like the teachings of this guy here?
Good question. No, it's a good question. So the Buddha, as represented in the image, is two things. There's respect for the man who lived 2,500 years ago, as a wise teacher. But I find that it's best conceptualized as the potential for clear knowing in the human heart. And that's what the Buddha essentially was. It's the idea that when you let go of all the defilements which usually color the mind, that what remains is a unentangled knowing and awakening. The thing is, the Buddha didn't define what that was exactly, because he said it was beyond conception. So in Christian tradition, there's apophatic and cataphatic method. And apophatic is speaking about God in terms of what it's not, whereas cataphatic is speaking about God and what it is. So God is this is the name, love, brightness, etc. But the Buddha only spoke in terms of ultimate truth, mainly in terms of apophatic. So what it is not, or what you are not. Like, you are not this body, you are not this personality. But as to what the human or the heart is when it lets go of all that, he said it's good and beautiful, but it's beyond words, so I'm not going to try to conceive it or to speak to it in too much detail. So he kind of left it all a little bit nebulous in that sense. Yeah, but for me, I appreciate bowing to the idea of the human potential for awakening, and the teachers I know who I feel like have actually realized that, or the saints. That's usually what I bow to personally. Yeah. Does that answer the question at all, or do you want any reflections on it as well? You know.
I guess it feels like they're kind of two different things. So I guess that doesn't answer that.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's some way of talking about God where it would be commensurate with that. You know, it's just, what does the term mean? Which is why the Buddha avoided it so often, I think, you know. Yeah. Because he saw his teachers, when you encounter really bright states of meditation, there's the tendency to take it as an encounter with God. It's like these really powerful states you've never encountered. And the Buddha saw his teachers get caught in these high states of meditation and take it as the ultimate again and again. So he was very brutal with being like, just detach or let go of each of these things if you see suffering in them. And what you come to eventually, he just refused to reify or to describe in too much detail for fear that people would become stuck again at these higher states. So, yeah. It's lack of clinging is the end goal, whatever that means. Yeah. Okay. It's a long one. I hope that's all right with everyone. Okay. So I think we were going to try a sort of breakout group thing at some point, but it might be a bit long today already, so we'll just call it good. But yeah, thank you for coming, and I think we'll have these every Sunday in the morning. So, and thank you for everyone live streaming. I would read your names, but the phone is really far away, so I can't actually see it. But it's good to see all of you. Okay, good.